Thank you for joining us at the Cybersecurity Summit discussion on insider threats. I'm Kristin Judge from the Cybercrime Support Network. We are a public-private partnership, nonprofit, and our mission is to serve individuals and small businesses impacted by cybercrime. We have a booth here at the conference, so do all these other great companies, and I'm really excited to have a conversation with these experts about insider threat. I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourself, and then we'll get started. So Kim?
Hi, I am Kim Berry. I am the Principal Security Threat Intelligence Researcher at Auth0. Auth0 is an identity as a service provider.
Thank you. Torsten?
Hello, everyone. My name is Torsten George. I'm a cybersecurity evangelist at Centrify, which helps organizations secure privileged access across hybrid and multi-cloud environments.
Thank you. Chris?
Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Pittman from BlackBerry. I run sales engineering here in the central US. BlackBerry, of course, has been around unified endpoint management and now unified endpoint security for a few years. So excited to talk to everybody today.
Thank you. Spencer?
Yeah, thank you. Spencer Lichtenstein. Nice to meet everyone. I work at RSA Security. I'm a global product strategist on the RSA NetWitness platform. We're a threat detection, response, and extended tech detection and response product set.
Thank you. Renee, good to see you again.
Hi, Kristin. Hi, I'm Renee Tarun. I'm Deputy CISO at Fortinet. Fortinet is a leading cybersecurity company. We provide cybersecurity solutions for the entire threat landscape, whether that's on-prem solutions on the cloud, ranging from firewall, SD-WAN, network access control, to endpoint, to private public cloud security, and everything in between.
Great, thank you. Jeff?
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Jeff Schwartz. I'm Vice President of North American Engineering here at Checkpoint Software. We've been the leading cybersecurity vendor in the space for 27 years.
Thank you. Dan?
My name is Dan Clark. I'm a senior systems engineer with Code 42. We have a purpose-built insider threat detection and response platform.
All right, great. Thank you so much. We're going to start with our first question here, and I'm going to have Chris kick it off for us. Chris, how do you identify potential malicious users before there's an attack and then defend against them?
So when you say prevent and before, the word that comes to mind is predictive capability. So when I think about predictive capability, that's where I go to machine learning and its ability to learn, right, based on user profile, user behavior, and identify anomalies and things that are different and outside of what is characteristic for a user. So, you know, we're doing a lot of things with that in the industry now, whether it's, you know, supervised and unsupervised models, but essentially if we adopt a philosophy of, let's say, transactional security, where, you know, we're identifying what users are doing on the fly as they do it. So we're not simply granting a user access to a system or an environment or an entire session. We're evaluating who the user is, where the user is, what device they're on, what they're trying to access. You know, is that normal? Is that okay? Is that risky? And then making a decision in that moment if that should be allowed. So I think if we can shift to that kind of security philosophy where we're making security decisions at the point of transaction, it helps reduce the overall threat of a user who may just be out there doing wrong or bad things, whether those things are intentional or unintentional.
Thank you. Kim, your thoughts on the question?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that you need to establish like a normal baseline of user behavior and then be able to detect changes from that. So having all of those facilities and tools in place and operating is really the most important. But also you need to, non-technical control is really to actually understand what kind of stressors your users are under and be able to respond to those. And also make sure there's a facility for like managers to report that information.
Great point. Renee, your thoughts?
Yeah, you know, I agree with my other panel members. It's also looking, you know, for things to be watching for within the behaviors of the employees. You know, you're looking for things like unauthorized use of IT resources and applications, whether that's, you know, employees putting things like using personal clouds for corporate information, you know, accessing, sharing, distributing PII when they're not authorized to do. using unauthorized or restricted applications like, network sniffing tools or remote desktop tools, looking for things like unauthorized transfers of data, using removable media, unauthorized copying of business data to clouds, transferring files to and from unusual destinations, and then misuse, abuse, and malicious behavior, things like misusing admin rights, disable or overriding your endpoint security products, and things like that. So you really need to have mitigations in place to protect that insider threat, whether that's the accidental or the malicious. So
Right.
monitoring and detection, using entity behavior analytics, leveraging least privileges, DLT, things like network segmentation, and then zero trust access. Adding multi-factor authentication on there, adding that additional layer to beyond the traditional password protection. But I also agree with what Kim said. Prevention is the critical first step, but the technology is only half the battle. It's really also creating and maintaining an attractive work condition can go a long way in preventing malicious behavior. So, and salary may not be the only reason. It's making sure that employees feel like they're part of the team and they create they're important to the mission and feeling valued and appreciated.
That's right. Good points. Thank you, Spencer. Your thoughts?
Yeah, some great points from the other panelists. I think to add maybe one layer that hasn't been touched on a lot yet, the visibility component from a technical side, as far as making sure you have good visibility into all the different sources of information that represent identities and users in your organization. So not just things like authentication logs or authentication systems, but also endpoint detailed file and process level endpoint data, network data, and often like we're seeing more and more cloud and sort of SaaS-based applications being accessed from off a traditional corporate perimeter network, gaining access sort of into all those consolidated data sets is a really great way to try to identify whether behaviors sit within the norm or outside the norm. Analytic systems have, I think, excellent potential at helping predict abnormal behavior, and machine learning and things have come a long way, but they're only as good as the data you feed into them, and also the models, the models in which you're sort of improving on and learning from. So that sort of visibility layer is a really crucial part of the early identification, of what malicious means or abnormal means in the context of your environment.
Thank you. Thank you. And Torsten, if you could finish this question out for us.
Sure. I think a lot of times insider threats are tied back to identities, and especially many organizations grant too much privilege to their staff, their contractors, their partners. And so the steps that you can take is, first of all, enforce segregation of duties, then establish the concept of least privilege, meaning zero standing privileges. If I'm a database administrator, I'm talking with you right now. Why would I need access rights to that database? Doesn't make sense. And then really implement access request and approval workflows to really have that additional transparency layer. If I wanted to gain access to that database, well, let's send a request to my supervisor. He looks at it, he looks at the context. Is there a ticket that would require me to access the database? If not, kind of questionable request. So all of these things can be taken into account on top of advanced detection technologies.
Yeah, thank you. Kim, this next question is for you. We'll start with you. How do you detect malicious threats once they've occurred? And then what do you do to mitigate the damage they can cause?
Sure. Well, first, to detect, you have to know. So I totally agree with the other panelists when we're talking about visibility across the spectrum of controls, making sure that your logging and monitoring facilities are in place and operational, and that you're collecting the correct events and fields that you expect and are able to use these in a way that you can detect these events. You can use detection mechanisms that are very simple, such as anomaly detection for failed user logins, for example, or you can do something very complex, like using natural language processing to determine like sentiment analysis of users to determine if the user is all of a sudden being disgruntled or they have a change in their behavior. But once you have all of that information, you've detected a malicious event has occurred, you definitely need to assess the situation, identify the appropriate partners. So you're actually pulling in legal or HR where you need to. And then depending on your requirements, your regulatory or legal requirements, you may have to push out a notification. But it is always important to maintain and test your controls and make sure they're always operational so that when these events do occur, you can properly detect them.
Great. Jeff, your thoughts on this one? How do we detect them, and then what do we do to mitigate the damage?
Yeah, I think that it can't be overstated, the need for qualitative advantage in preventative controls. That not all IPS are the same, not all anti-malware technology suites are the same, and there's a rush to the perception of commoditization around some of these capabilities. So much so that when organizations are moving to agile delivery and they're moving to kind of shift left security models, that native controls are presumed to be good enough. So I think that on the one hand, we need to do a better job of educating our end user communities and organizations around the need for qualitative advantage in preventative controls. But when there's an incident, when there's an event, that there needs to be more transparency from an operational visibility perspective that can be automated. That many organizations are still very, very reliant on the capabilities associated with passive visibility tools. And the challenge with these, if we acknowledge the hard trends of cloud adoption and agile delivery and integration with a more modern application and service delivery, is that if it can't be automated, if the controls and enforcement and mitigating factors cannot be automated after or either before or after an event has occurred, then it's not built to scale properly to support the increasing and accelerating diversity of technologies that organizations are adopting to support more modern integrations with third parties, with affiliate organizations, and that the passive visibility tools need to be able to be integrated in an automated platform that could provide mitigating controls in the face of malicious events.
Thank you. Spencer, your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I think that to add to that point that Jeff brought up on the automation front, the importance of layering in context from the business and the IT assets that are potentially affected once a detection occurs is something that I think can't be overstated. So understanding, if the network segment or the server or the endpoint, belongs to a critical finance department, or whether it's simply, a roaming device that's a new employee who's maybe behaving in a way that we don't understand yet. Those sorts of key questions are ones that really inform a security operations team's ability to respond appropriately. It's sort of with measured response, and also what sort of orchestration and automation might be able to be wrapped around that detection. Certain detections may mandate a degree of automation, while others may mandate sort of degrees of escalation and additional investigation. And I think when we talk about mitigating damage quickly wrapping context and additional correlation around a detection of possible anomaly is really an important part of running that threat to ground very fast.
Thank you so much. Chris, finish this question up for us, please.
Sure. So first, I couldn't agree with Jeff more, right, about the idea of good enough security always makes me nervous, whether I'm helping a customer or I am the customer, right? I think that's a dangerous place that we've gotten to be. And as you said also, right, not all of our solutions are the same. There's still a lot of room for us to do evaluation on the tool sets that we use. And essentially what we're talking here is about some kind of a detection and response capability. How quickly can we do that? How much of it can we automate? And if I'm selecting a tool from someone to perform some level of detection and response, how well or easily can I customize that for my environment? In other words, I don't just want to be able to detect what you think I need to detect. I need to be able to conform that solution to my environment, which may have unique vulnerabilities or unique sensitive operations. And I think for that reason, right, having tools that can comply with, that can conform to, and utilize things that are outlined in like the MITRE ATT&CK framework. That gives us that broad spectrum of different kinds of activity and attacks to monitor and be able to respond to. I think that's an increasing standard that I see having some value in how we evaluate our tools.
Thank you so much, Dan. This next question, I'm going to start with you. How do you identify areas where an unintentional insider threat may occur and then prevent the human error from causing a breach?
Sure. I think I'm going to echo a concept that we've spoken of a lot on this conversation already, which is monitoring and detection. There's a tendency, I think, in the world of overworked security folks and understaffed IT organizations to try to automate as much as they can, which is a tremendously useful thing, but we create an opportunity to not see things that fall outside of the scope of what we're monitoring. So kind of creating a combination between how we're solving this by blocking or limiting or preventing access, but also then making certain to put eyes on and gather information about what is passing through those things. So we have the opportunity to see either the gap or the concerning behavior and move in front of that, either from, I loved what Kim said earlier about stressors that your users are under, the human factors that are involved, like what motivations are driving these people, and how do you kind of turn up the volume on your awareness based on the culture of your company or events that are happening. I think really that leaning into those other components is a huge part, in addition to the great technical controls that we have today.
Well, and especially as you talk about stress on your employees, we're living through unprecedented times, and a lot of people's offices are now also a 6th grade classroom. So we've really got to understand where our users are, and most insider threat is not malicious, but people are certainly more stressed than ever and in different situations. Thank you. I'm going to go to Renee for this next one. What more can be done to raise the bar on the level of knowledge employees should have on safe online behavior so they don't become an insider threat?
Yeah, thanks, Kristin. I think a lot of this involves, it really focuses on the education and training, but that all starts ultimately in creating that culture of security, where everyone realizes that they have a role to play in securing, an organization's network and data. For a lot of organizations, we all have to make our compliance, so we have to do that mandatory security awareness training, but it should be a continuous throughout the year. It should not be a one and done. And it doesn't just have to be classes. It can be things like doing simple informational bulletins on a monthly basis to give those employees awareness, like, things like coming up, like, for example, holiday scams. Because I'm a firm believer that, if you can train your employees to be, more cyber conscious wherever they operate, whether that's home, in the office, or on the go, that overall helps in protecting, the company's, data and missions. Doing things like phish testings. Our FortiGuard labs have definitely seen an increase in phishing attempts, and doing things like gamification, helping them, identify and spot the phish. Because even now the adversaries even stepped up their games, where we've seen them, compromising a supplier, or a partner, or customer's email. So now you have emails coming in from trusted domains, and they may not have a malicious link or malicious attachment. They simply compromise the account and are telling you to, change the routing information for the bank. That's not a technology is going to be able to solve that. You really need to have that human, because a lot of times now they're that first line of defense, because people are working from home. They can't pop their head up over a cubicle and say, hey, is this legit? Or, run to the help desk. So, and most people, they do want to do the right thing when we're talking about the accidental insider, but they need to understand, what are the policies and expectations are. And last but not least, they need to know where and who they should report if they think that there's a suspected incident going on.
That's right. Especially now that we're not in the office, that's got to be really clear, maybe reiterated. Thank you. And so I think too, it's important for us to share from CSN standpoint. We have a website called scamspotter.org. And I hope that you can use that with your customers and even with your employees, so they understand what is a scam and what is real. Dan, could you talk a little bit about raising the bar on safe online behavior?
Yeah, it's what Renee was just talking about, actually, the interactions that you have the opportunity to do so with your, to have with your users. Specifically, she mentioned phishing tests, but I sheepishly admit that I've had a few conversations with my security team in a positive way but saying, hey, we noticed this, this thing was happening, what was going on there, and not in a negative way, much as getting an understanding. And so kind of creating that, it's a wonderful combination of, we're watching you, but when we do talk to you, we're not going to be, we're going to be kind to you about it. And I do think having those interactions, having that visibility, it's kind of the speed camera effect, right? Where, you know, people speed down the road recklessly if there's no one watching, but as soon as you put a bunch of cameras there and you find out someone gets a ticket, everyone changes their behavior. And so I think increasing just that that awareness within your culture that there is something happening, and the frequency of that, also Renee indicated, is a huge part. An annual phishing test doesn't really keep that top of mind, and so
yeah, it's got to be constant, just a part of the culture that you have. Torsten, your thoughts on this?
I agree with Renee, and then definitely security awareness training, extending that to simulations, because reading a paper and taking a test is one thing, but then experiencing it on an ongoing basis, running these simulations, is really changing end user behaviors. But then also, as we kind of a little bit hinted on it, the techniques, tactics, and procedures of hackers are changing. For instance, from a phishing perspective nowadays, there are a lot of phishing attacks. So it's no longer core focused on emails. We get more and more phishing attacks via our mobile phone. And so as an organization, we have to adapt our training material on a more frequent basis, not just once a year overhauling it, but probably on a quarterly basis, updating that material, staying in line with what hackers are really leveraging when they exploit their victims.
Thank you so much. I want to come back to Chris on this next question. And we talked a little bit about living through COVID now, the work from home situation. It's impacted a lot of organizations. And I want you to talk a little bit about how it's impacted organizations based on insider risk, and what are some of the things companies are doing or could do to make insider risk less of a threat now that we're working from home.
Yeah, so let's just talk about a couple things that have increased that risk, right? One is users working on non-secured, non-company hardware. So they're accessing they're accessing company resources, services, applications from their own devices. And they're increasingly accessing that information from mobile devices, which are notoriously unsecurable, right? So both of those things are issues. So I think if we shift security and start looking at, let's talk about the applications that they're using and the data that they're accessing. The company can do things like, right, if you're going to use a mobile application or download something to access company data with, let's make sure it's an approved company application. At least let's have an approved list. If not, let's also have an approved company store, right, for apps where they can download company approved or company secure applications. And then on the digital rights management, right, which includes that whole spectrum of being able to control where a document can reside, who can look at a document, if the document needs to detonate, right, if it moves out of a certain geography or outside of a certain network, that allows us to control that data. So I think focusing our security concepts on the applications and the data rather than the devices, which we may not be able to do right now during COVID, is a sound practice that I'm seeing.
Thank you. Jeff, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think most companies, most enterprise organizations have a fairly well-evolved, mature, robust security stack that lives at the edge of their traditional data center or physical environments. And one of the things that this work from home situation that's thrust upon them is, to echo some of Chris's points, that it's put them in a situation there where they have wildly inconsistent security controls against these mobile or work from home user populations. And organizations have had to adapt very, very quickly to first solve the access problem, which I think many have been able to get past. But what this issue that many organizations are contending with illustrates is that there's a huge gap in operational consistency in terms of the security outcomes that are achievable based on applications and services that are deployed in a traditional fashion versus how their user populations now need to access those applications and services. And we see this further accelerating with the hard trends of IoT and cloud adoption that this inconsistency of security operations and security controls across different infrastructure and user populations and asset classes is creating a huge security gap. That's where organizations are starting to invest in platform-based solutions that can solve this in a more consistent fashion. That protections that are applied in a traditional data center environment can also be enforced in mobile consumption vehicles. They could also be consumed in IoT implementations where there is no capacity to install a physical device or install an agent. To apply this to cloud infrastructure like S3, where there's no physical gateway or logical gateway that could sit in front of S3 or Salesforce. So these are the types of more modern implementations around security portability that we see organizations adopting.
Thank you. Kim, your thoughts?
Yep, I think like we were saying before, like the 6th grade classroom situation, people are still just under a lot of stress. There may be children at home, the dog's barking. There's definitely a lot more distractions. So I think there's a lot more likelihood of just negligence kind of taking place, non-malicious insider threat necessarily. So it's important really to update your security policies to make sure that you're addressing the work from home situation, providing support for your employees where you can. And then it's a good time, really, like the other two panelists just said, to reassess all of your security controls to make sure that they are working in a work from home environment for you and that they're still effective in this environment. That might require some shifting of priorities and other types of security controls, but we want to make sure we're, protecting the organization the best we can. But after all of this is done, what's also very important is to go back and retrain your users and on these updated policies so that they're completely aware of all of the changes that have been made in this new work from home environment.
Yeah, and that's going to take some time and effort. Good point to make that a priority for right now. And then Spencer, would you like to add to this?
Yeah, one thing we've seen in addition to I think a lot of what's been said already with expanded perimeter is that a lot of our customers have had employees who are doing a lot more on their company issued devices because I think often because of convenience, they're sitting in their office, their kid comes in, they want to do something, or the blend of work hours and personal hours is sort of very blurred. So one piece we've seen come up a lot is the visibility on the endpoint at a very, very granular level. A lot of organizations placed a huge emphasis on preventative controls on endpoints and not as much on sort of the detection, response, and forensics components on endpoints. And we've seen a lot more sort of breach-related and insider threat-related activity coming from often negligence of people just installing things on corporate devices that policies didn't prevent before, but now they need to because of the shifting sort of work environment, and also just doing things like accessing websites or areas where more advanced threats that aren't as easily consumed with preventative controls are able to, install on a corporate endpoint or a laptop and then possibly compromise other parts of the network. So I think that sort of deep device visibility that Chris was talking about a little on the mobile side, we've seen a greater need for that sort of granular level on the endpoint side as well, like the more traditional endpoint side.
We have a lot more endpoints running around that need to be looked at. Good points. And then Torsten, can you finish this question up for us?
Sure. I mean, we earlier talked about user entity behavior analytics as well as data loss prevention. And this is typically your tool that you deploy to get an early indicator for insider threats. But the fact that employees are currently mandated to work from home blurs the intelligence provided by these tools, because the behavior baselines that typically got established are now all gone, correct? We've all moved out of the office, and so it needs to be reset, and it takes time for that. So, and on top of it, you might have employees that might not be monitored by these security tools because they weren't set up initially for that. And so we have seen a shift in budget initially to fill this gap to invest in secure remote access solutions. Multi-factor authentication went up quite significantly. So very much a focus on access controls. But I think we will go back, we will see to reestablish these behavioral baselines. It takes a couple of months, but people will reinvest in these tools.
I hadn't thought about that before. I'm glad to see you're seeing actually money going in investing in security. I hope it's one of those things that will last beyond COVID now, because once you've added two-factor to your entire enterprise, hopefully no one's going to say, oh, now we don't really care as much anymore. Maybe that's some silver lining we can hope for, right? Renee, this next question's for you. How can deception technologies help thwart off malicious insiders?
Yeah, I mean, deception helps, address, really a two-pronged approach to breach protection by, redirecting both, the external and internal threats away from critical assets. The theory behind deception technologies, it's simple. It arms the network with tripwire decoys disguised as data assets that can alert the security teams when they've been accessed. So it essentially lures the criminals away from actual valuable data while exposing their presence, often without their knowledge. So this allows the security teams to engage in forensic analysis, in real time, by closely monitoring their patterns, activities, the techniques, the discovered, breach devices and exploited vulnerabilities. The next generation deception, differs from detection-based honeypots because it also includes tools such as threat analytics, as well as integration with security controls to proactively block the attacks before any real damage can be inflicted. So, if there's a rogue employee that's starting to poke around on the network for information that they're not authorized to access, deception technology is one way that, can help you catch them.
Thank you so much. This next question is for Chris. Chris, how is the insider threat program magnified with the increase in mobile device vulnerabilities and exploits? We talked a little bit on that, but can you go a little bit deeper on that?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, right, the fact that everyone's now using mobile devices more for productivity. I think about the fact that now working from home 100%, I do more from my phone than I ever have because I have the access with some applications to do document editing, right? Even access, right? Salesforce, I can do employee management tasks there. And we all have this intrinsic bias that two things, right? My mobile device is just more secure than my computer because it's not a computer, therefore it doesn't have the same vulnerabilities that a PC does. And then there's just the personal bias that this is less vulnerable because it's mine, right? I know my device is safe because it hasn't been anywhere unsafe, it hasn't been hacked. And both of those things are part of the problem where insider threat is concerned. This isn't like the malicious insider, this is just the mindsets of bias that leave us open for attack. And when we compare that with the fact that a whole lot of applications that we find on stores increasingly have either backdoors or just flat out malware included in them. And then also the fact that the data that's stored on those phones is susceptible to leakage, right? Both of those things comprise huge problems for us now with the fact that we're using those mobile devices all of the time. So the reality is that it's about everything we've talked about. It's about education. It's about controls. It's about device management. It's about application and digital rights management. But it's also about recognizing that the threat actors that have been targeting mobile devices is something that's real, right? There's a number of white papers that have been released in the last month, 2 months, 3 months that are documenting years old attacks on mobile devices and mobile operating systems that we previously thought were safe or had been not hacked. So it's just a reality that needs to be addressed by the entire industry.
It needs to be talked about more because I don't think everybody's hearing that same message. Good point. Kim, could you add to this one?
Yeah, I think that mobile devices notoriously are hard to implement things like user and entity behavioral analytics controls. And on top of that, these mobile devices might be personal devices, so they might be subject to privacy controls or things that we're not allowed to do monitoring on necessarily to the degree that we would on a normal endpoint device. So they provide that extra threat vector that we're not really looking at or have that level of visibility into today.
Yeah, so if you could continue expanding on it a little bit, Kim, we'll keep this next question with you. How can you be proactive about insider threat?
Trust your controls. That's what I would say. Get your red team in there. Let them go crazy. Let them be clever. I mean, the ways that you see insiders actually bypassing your controls is just the most interesting part about this for me, because people are so clever. So if you get your red team in there, you get them to test your controls, you'll identify all of the gaps in your controls, take it all the way through incident response, make sure that you have your incident response plan in place and all the way through to the end. I think that's the best way to be proactive in this environment.
Great advice. Spencer, this next question is for you. Looking to the future now, how do you anticipate increased adoption of cloud resources will impact insider threat mitigation?
Yeah, so, you know, the cloud is awesome. Our cloud resources are a great kind of expandable, flexible way for organizations to, you know, quickly expand and contract as they need to. I think from the insider threat challenge, one of the biggest ones we've seen is just the granular level of the data that you can get out of SaaS and cloud applications, depending on the provider, depending on the service. It's widely variable. You know, infrastructure providers like Amazon or Google or Microsoft, you know, will often provide extremely detailed data for you if you know where to get it and if you have the right API calls written. And often others, you know, SaaS applications, you're very limited on what you can pull out. And that just goes back to the earliest stages of understanding the data on your user base and being able to do analytics and provide the appropriate context and then provide meaningful detections to security teams. And I think as we look at the future, there's going to be requirement to get better data out of cloud and SaaS systems. You know, and I think the providers are going to have to shift, those who haven't, to just provide more robust APIs and interfaces to pull rich data out. You know, it may land on the organization or the security vendor in order to utilize that. But at the end of the day, we really need to get that data out in order to mash it up with on-prem, virtual, and just all the other infrastructure data that we're already used to looking at. We need to, I think, start to treat cloud and SaaS data in general in the same manner. And we just haven't been able to do that. And I think, you know, the remote work shift is forcing some of that even further.
Thank you. Renee, you want to add some information about the cloud, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it also, you know, increases that chances from an insider perspective of that shadow IT aspect. Because now essentially anybody with a credit card in your organization can kind of go out there and, you know, create a cloud instantiation. So, you know, again, it increases that risk of, you know, people putting, you know, technology and data out in places without ensuring that they have followed, you know, the proper policies and security controls. So I think it, again, increases that risk for shadow IT perspective.
Yeah, thank you so much. What are the most common insider threats defined by the intent and motivation of individuals involved? Torsten, could you answer this one for us?
Sure. I mean, we talked 40 minutes about insiders, and organizations need to be aware not all insiders are equal, meaning they have different motivation, which then also influences the indicator of compromise. So you have, according to Verizon Insider Threat Report, you have the careless worker. So that's an employee who misappropriates resources. He breaks acceptable use policies, meaning using too weak passwords. He mishandles data. He, as we heard earlier, might install unauthorized applications, especially now that we're at home. And he might use simply workarounds. And so here the actions are inappropriate. They're not malicious. And often it falls into shadow IT. The second one, you have the inside agents. So these are recruited, solicited, and bribed by external parties to exfiltrate data. And we have seen that recently in some of the data breaches that made the headlines, that this happens more often nowadays. You have the disgruntled employees, insiders who really seek harm to the employer, either by destruction of data or disruption of the business activity. You have the malicious insiders, really the actors that target you, that really go after the corporate assets to make monetary gains. And then you have the feckless third party, your business partners, who might compromise either by negligence, by misuse, or by malicious access your assets. And so you have to keep this in mind. Not all insiders are equal, and therefore the indicators of compromise will differ, and you have to prepare for that.
Thank you so much. Now, I want to remind the audience that we're going to go through a little round robin here, but we're also at our booth. So if you want to continue the conversation, please make sure to continue engaging with these great experts here as you're thinking about your own insider threat program. So Kim, last words you want to leave with the audience?
Again, just test your controls. Make sure they're working, functional, operational, everything you expect before something bad happens. You don't want something bad to happen, then all of a sudden turn around and find out it was never logged, it was never monitored. We didn't have that agent in place and operational on that device. That's just the worst situation to be in. So just be very proactive about testing and monitoring your controls.
Thank you, Chris.
I would say always remember and feel empowered to build your security programs from the inside out, right? Don't let whatever the industry or vendors tell you what you need. Your industry, your company, your environment, your people, your devices, your data is unique to you. So build your security program accordingly.
Thank you. Torsten?
I think the old thinking of perimeter defense, you can wash down the drain. I think you have to acknowledge that most likely attackers, threat actors already exist in your network, and therefore you should take a stand of zero trust privilege and really put security controls in place that that follow what hackers are really exploiting.
Thank you, Renee.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with a lot of what Kim, Chris, and Torsten said. I mean, when you look at combating the insider threat, it's a combination of people, processes, and technology. You really need to make sure that you have the right training, education, and awareness, but also the right processes, put in place to handle an insider threat program. And then doing that from a technology standpoint, making sure that you have the appropriate monitoring, detection, and whether that's endpoint protection and detection and response, zero trust controls, and then doing things like network segmentation, least privilege, and deception technologies. Because again, the quicker you can detect and mitigate, the quicker you can respond.
Yeah, thank you so much, Spencer.
Yeah, everyone makes a great point. I think maybe my parting words would just be understand where the data you care about is and who has access to it, and then make sure that you're able to see that data. You can't respond to things that you don't have visibility into. And if that visibility is coming from new places and you don't have access to it yet, that's going to be the thing that really limits you in your ability to detect an insider. So really do an audit and understand what those factors are and how you're going to gain access to them as a security team if you don't already.
Yeah, identify those crown jewels and know where your data lives. Great points. And Jeff?
Yeah, I would comment that one, better security matters. It creates differentiated security outcomes from a preventative controls perspective. It needs to be portable against cloud, mobile, endpoint, and traditional network security implementations. And it needs to be fully automatable, that if a human being has to touch it, it's not built to scale properly for the agile requirements of many, many user populations.
Thank you. And Dan?
Thanks for having me here. I would say that let's remember that the world is full of bad guys, right, that are doing stuff, but those aren't generally the people that are putting our companies at risk. They're good people who are trying to do their jobs in this open and collaborative culture that keeps growing and growing and growing. And so that as much as we're trying to protect ourselves, we're also trying to empower those users to do what they need to do and make sure that as they're creating shadow IT and finding loopholes through things, we understand why they're doing that, and we can evolve our programs with them so that they're maybe no longer vulnerabilities they're looking to team with us.
Yeah, you have to work with your teams. It can't be adversarial, and it can't be something that they were worried they're going to get punished, so they don't tell you what they did. You got to have a culture of security, like everybody's talked about here, and together you can actually create a safer atmosphere. So again, audience, please visit everybody at their booths. We'd love to continue talking to you. Thank you to this amazing panel. I always learn something on these panels. And thank you to the Cybersecurity Summit for bringing us together. Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.